Then we had another programme we launched this week is about repairing the planet. And 6 things we want Londoners to do. And it's the simple ones. Reduce the thermostat by 1 degree or 2 if you wish to be really bold. Don't put more water in the kettle than you need for that you're going to use. Switch off your lights when you leave the room. And those people who grew up, as I did, telling my father, but it uses more energy to switch them back on. That's not true. As long as you're out the room for 10 seconds, it actually makes sense and saves energy to actually switch the lights off. Not leaving the mobile phone charger on standby, turning off all the other things that are on standby. Altogether, those 6 changes, I've mostly forgotten one, but those 6 changes would reduce London's emissions by 3% and save the average family £100 a year. Taking the insulation and those things, over a decade, we could actually reduce our carbon emissions by 7.7 million tonnes, out of a total of 44. So that's a huge step forward, just from changes that do nothing to diminish people's quality of life. We're doing the same sort of thing with commercial buildings. Now here we've looked on a much bigger scale. We've set up a structure which we call the C40, which is largely the world's biggest cities. Got 34 of the largest cities in the world and 6 smaller ones that have been incredibly innovative in the things they've done in driving forward the assault on carbon emissions. And we've got an alliance with the Clinton Foundation that negotiates on our behalf with large international corporations. And we put together a package which we unveiled last month in New York, which is quite remarkable. 5 of the largest banks in the world immediately make available a $1 billion loan fund each, so $5 billion instantly available. The 4 largest energy services companies like Honeywell and Siemens and Trane slash their prices 30 to 40%. And 16 of those largest cities, Paris and Moscow and New York and Chicago and Berlin and London and others, all sign up that all their public buildings are to be retrofitted out of this fund. Now that creates, at a stroke, a 120% increase in the global market for retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency. And that's just the beginning. Each of those cities, which is effectively the largest in their country, goes back, establishes it, and then actually gets the other cities to come on board, and it spreads in a national way. And if we can do that, and it spreads, given that here in this city, nearly 40% of our emissions are from commercial and public buildings, if you could just reduce energy consumption and CO2 emissions by 25%, that's a 10% reduction in global emissions. It's twice the Kyoto target, achieved without involving any government, because we haven't got the time to waste talking about who's to blame. But the city's sitting down with big banks and the major energy service providers to do a deal that creates a market that people will be keen to flood into. And looking at this, it means each of these energy service companies starts training tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of new workers around the world to put these technologies in place. It cuts out all the hassle. If you're running a large building at the moment, the number of firms you'd have to engage with and haggle with to get it done, it's off-putting. What you'll get, each of these energy service companies will turn up, do an audit, give you a shopping list, you choose what you want done, it's paid for out of the loans the banks have put up. You repay the money you repay that loan by giving 80% of the savings that you've made in your energy budget each year, and as you repay it, you keep more and the energy service company gets less. If your energy savings don't equal the cost of the loan, the energy service company will bear the loss. So you've immediately said to every hospital and police station and school and municipal or government building in the largest cities in the world, this can all be done at no cost and minimum hassle. And this is not something that excludes the private sector. The objective is to use public buildings to create the market. which the private sector will then access exactly the same package themselves. And we'll be talking to banks here in Britain as we roll this out. Now, this is a huge contract. It has to go through the European contracting regime. That will take 6 months or so. But we intend to draft it so that, having done the one contract, no other public body will have to go through the European contracting regime. We will have it in an open form. We will establish, most probably, all the 4 energy providers as contractors, and so cut out all the waste and hassle. Now, literally no government's been involved in any of that. I mean, all those mayors at that meeting were just sitting around exchanging stories about how difficult it is to get their government, not all of them, but the most of them, to actually move and take decisions. So we've actually bypassed government to go directly to the marketplace to create a market that will start to deliver these changes. And that brings me, because I couldn't break the habits of a lifetime and not have something bad to say about my own government, to what's happening here. What is breathtaking about the government's inability to act domestically is it's in total contrast to everything they say whilst posing on the world stage. It's almost everything that's classically wrong about this government. The assumption if you've made a speech and you've got headlines, you've solved the problem, rather than driven down through the structures of bureaucracy and business to make the institutional and market changes necessary to deliver. And the whole thing that's been posed in this country is a completely false choice between nuclear power stations and coal-fired or gas power stations. And I've watched this debate, and it's bitten very deep into public consciousness. There's a huge, and it might not quite be a majority, but the best part, about half the public's been won over the idea if the only way to stop global warming is to build nuclear power stations, we'll have to have them. Well, I'm not in favour of building any more nuclear power stations, or coal-fired power stations, or gas power stations, because they're inherently part of the problem. Our problem is, in most of the industrialised nations, we have huge centralised energy production in which 2/3 of the energy is wasted. If you have decentralised energy, 15% is wasted. And that's what's happening in Sweden and Denmark and other countries in Germany that are producing energy locally, and the water that is used as part of the cooling process is then used to heat or cool local buildings. And that clearly has to be the way forward. The debate about how many nuclear power stations or any other form of power station we should replace in 20 years pales into insignificance if we had a programme that means instead of wasting 2/3 of the energy we produce, we cut that to just 15%. You don't need any more. And that's the position we've got in London. We're working with EDF, our major energy supplier. They got over 100 of their brightest people, engineers, working on driving ahead to move to decentralised energy in London.